we first started the show, I really thought we were doing a show about building cars and motorcycles for people. It evolved into a show about people and their story. It really brought challenges in the early days.
One Las Vegas custom shop turned 9 seasons of television into a masterclass in how not to manage people. For a decade, Danny Koker built Count's Kustoms into one of the most recognizable garages in automotive television history. And somewhere inside that decade was a collection of employee disasters, quiet departures, legal scandals, and behind-the-scenes chaos that the cameras only partially captured. But what if the 5 most problematic employees who passed through those doors were not the ones most fans would guess? Join us as we reveal the names of the 5 worst employees that Danny Koker named. Number 5. Scott Jones. Every custom shop needs someone willing to be the bad guy, the person who watches the budget, enforces the deadlines, and tells the owner uncomfortable truths about the numbers when the owner would rather be looking at a classic muscle car than a spreadsheet. At Count's Kustoms, that person was Scott Jones, and for 2 seasons of Counting Cars, he performed that function with such relentless confrontational energy that his presence became one of the show's most compelling dynamics. Then between Season 2 and Season 3, he was simply gone, with no announcement and no explanation offered to an audience that had been watching him argue with Danny Koker every week and found the whole arrangement oddly compelling. Scott's role at Count's Kustoms combined shop manager and bookkeeper, 2 functions that put him in direct daily conflict with an owner who was, by every observable measure, far more interested in the creative and mechanical dimensions of the work than in the financial ones. Danny Koker's instinct has always been toward the deal, the build, the acquisition of something interesting that the shop can transform into something spectacular. Scott Jones's instinct was toward the ledger, the deadline, the uncomfortable question of whether the shop was actually making money on the projects Danny kept enthusiastically committing to. 2 people with those opposing orientations working together in a high-pressure environment with cameras recording everything were always going to generate friction. The friction was genuine and visible, and it made for television that felt more authentic than most of what surrounded it. Scott Jones left Counting Cars between the 2nd and 3rd seasons, and the 3rd season premiere revealed he had moved to Tennessee following the birth of his son, though the show provided minimal elaboration about the circumstances of the departure. The official version was always the family explanation, and it is entirely plausible. The show had documented Scott's connection to Tennessee across multiple episodes, and a man with a newborn who had always described Greenville as his real home making the decision to return. There is not a story that requires additional explanation to be credible. What complicated the official version was the timing, the silence, and the context that surrounded the departure. A former Count's Kustoms employee named Joseph Frontiera was accused of embezzling $75,000 from the business in 2017, creating a pattern of financial betrayal at the shop that made every bookkeeper's departure look suspicious, regardless of the actual circumstances. Scott handled the books. Scott left without a public explanation at a time when the shop's finances were apparently complicated enough to attract future criminal conduct from someone else in a financial role. The connection was speculative then and remains unproven, but it generated a rumor that has never fully disappeared from the conversation around his departure. What is not speculative is that the personality that made Scott Jones such compelling television was also the personality that made him genuinely difficult to work alongside. The constant arguments, the refusal to back down from positions he believed were correct, regardless of who held the opposing view. The willingness to tell Danny Koker that a financial decision was wrong in front of a camera crew, all of those qualities are valuable in a bookkeeper and exhausting in a colleague. Whether the departure was driven by a new baby in Tennessee, by financial tensions that never became public, or simply by a personality collision that finally reached its natural conclusion. Scott Jones left a gap that Kevin Mack filled with considerably less drama and considerably more harmony, which was probably what the shop needed by that point. If the manager who watched the money created problems that were partly about personality and partly about finances, the next employee on this list created problems that were entirely about finances, and those problems ended in a lawsuit. Number 4. Joseph Frontiera. There are employees who create problems through attitude, incompetence, creative differences, or the simple incompatibility that develops between people who spend too much time together under pressure. And then there is Joseph Frontiera, who created a problem of an entirely different category, one that required lawyers, a civil lawsuit, and the kind of negative publicity that no television production wants circulating while the show is still in active production. Frontiera worked at Counts Kustoms during a period that overlapped with the middle seasons of Counting Cars, appearing on screen in a role that gave him enough visibility to be recognized by fans, while the behind-the-scenes reality of what was happening with the shop's money remained entirely invisible. The accusations that eventually emerged were specific and serious. Frontiera was accused of embezzling funds from Counts Kustoms, using company money for personal expenses in a pattern that allegedly totaled $75,000 before the theft was discovered. The lawsuit filed against Frontiera in 2017 sought to recover the embezzled funds and was one of 2 significant legal actions that Counts Kustoms was navigating simultaneously during that period, with the other involving a customer dispute over a Mustang restoration project that had generated its own separate wave of negative attention. The convergence of a customer lawsuit and an employee embezzlement case in the same general period created the kind of legal environment that production companies find enormously difficult to manage while simultaneously trying to present a functional, thriving business to a weekly television audience. The detail that makes the Frontiera situation particularly troubling in context is what it revealed about the financial oversight systems at Counts Kustoms during the show's peak years. A theft totaling $75,000 does not happen in a single transaction. It accumulates over time through repeated smaller acts that require a level of access, trust, and inadequate monitoring to sustain without detection. The fact that Frontiera was able to reach that total before the scheme was discovered speaks to a shop environment where the chaos of reality television production, the constant flow of projects, clients, builds, and camera crews created enough operational noise to obscure financial misconduct that a more controlled environment might have caught considerably earlier. Danny Koker confirmed in a published interview that the embezzlement was a genuine betrayal that damaged more than the balance sheet, describing the experience of discovering theft by someone trusted enough to handle shop finances as one of the more personally difficult aspects of running the business during the show's run. The financial loss was recoverable. The trust, once that kind of violation occurs in a close working environment, is considerably harder to restore. Counts Kustoms has continued operating since the Frontiera situation was resolved, but the episode left a visible mark on how the shop subsequently approached the financial dimension of its operations. And if an employee who stole $75,000 represents the most legally consequential departure on this list, the next name involves a different kind of professional failure, one that was more visible, more public, and in some ways more personally damaging to a shop that prided itself on the quality of its craft. Number 3. Roly Sabo. In a show populated by personalities ranging from the flamboyant to the quietly competent, Roly Sabo occupied a space entirely his own. The Hungarian-born detailer with the thick accent, the nickname Rock and Roly, and the ability to make the act of polishing a paint surface seem like performance art became one of the most genuinely beloved figures in Counting Cars' entire run. Fans who could not tell a quarter panel from a rocker panel still knew exactly who Roly was and why his presence made the shop feel like a more interesting place to spend an hour of television. Then, after Season 6, he was gone, and the manner of his going raised questions that have never been fully resolved. Roly Sabo's journey to Count's Kustoms was itself one of the more unusual biographies in the show's cast. Born in Hungary, arriving in the United States in 1997 with a lifelong dream of living in America, working initially for the Ringling Brothers Circus, then as a bodyguard and driver for Michu Mesaros, the man who held the record as the world's shortest person, then as an army ambulance driver before eventually landing in the automotive world and finding his way to Las Vegas. The detailing work that brought him to Count's Kustoms before the cameras arrived was the expression of a specific and genuine skill set, not a television audition. When Counting Cars began filming, Roly was already there. According to Wikipedia's official Counting Cars entry, Roly left Count's Kustoms after Season 6 on good terms, subsequently opening his own detailing business, called Rock N' Roly Custom Detailing in Las Vegas, where he continued working on vehicles of all kinds and eventually expanded his client base to include work in Quebec, Canada. The official characterization of the departure as amicable is supported by the fact that Roly continued to promote the show on social media after leaving and was photographed with former cast member Horny Mike in a social setting that looked nothing like two people who had parted under hostile circumstances. What the official version does not explain is why Roly, in the multiple occasions when fans asked him directly why he left, consistently deflected the question rather than providing the kind of straightforward explanation that an amicable departure on good terms would presumably make simple to give. The theft of an entire trailer containing thousands of dollars worth of his personal detailing equipment from a Las Vegas beach bar parking lot in 2017 was one documented event that created genuine financial hardship, with some observers noting that the trailer's branding made it a more visible target than it would have been without television exposure. Whether that loss contributed to the timing of his departure or simply coincided with it remains unclear. The COVID-19 pandemic subsequently delivered another blow to the independent business that had been built on the reputation earned at Count's Kustoms, with Roly disclosing on social media in 2021 that the loss of clients had severely damaged his income, forced a housing change, and coincided with a personal breakup that made the summer of 2021 one of the more difficult stretches of his post-television life. The message posted at that time, encouraging followers never to give up, carried the weight of someone who had genuinely tested that advice and was passing it along from personal experience rather than motivational platitude. The question of what really caused Roly to leave Counting Cars may never have a clean answer. What is clear is that the departure cost the show one of its most distinctive personalities and cost Roly himself the platform that had built the client base his independent business depended on. At a moment when the risks of independence turned out to be considerably higher than they may have appeared in the early post-show period. But if the fan favorite's departure created the most emotional response from viewers, the next employee on this list created a different kind of controversy, one rooted not in theft or legal trouble, but in the particular kind of tension that develops when two people have fundamentally different ideas about what a job is supposed to be, and neither one is willing to move. Number 2. Shannon Aikau. Shannon Aikau's presence on Counting Cars represented something specific and valuable that the show's car-focused identity sometimes overshadowed. Genuine motorcycle craftsmanship at the level where the machines being built were closer to rolling sculpture than to transportation. As the bike shop manager and lead builder whom Danny Koker publicly described as the number one in the bike department, Shannon brought a precision and a dedication to fabrication that the most discerning audience members recognized as the real thing rather than television approximation. The Hawaiian roots and the quiet intensity that Shannon brought to the screen stood in useful contrast to the louder, more extroverted personalities that dominated much of the show's dynamic. Where Danny Koker commanded attention through force of personality, and Horny Mike commanded it through sheer visual eccentricity, Shannon Aikau commanded it through the quality of what came out of his hands. The bikes that emerged from his section of the shop were the kind of work that silenced arguments about whether the television version of Count's Kustoms matched the real thing. Shannon Aikau joined the show in its early seasons after Danny Koker recognized his fabrication and engineering skills, and his departure in the middle seasons was described by the show's producers as a mutual decision driven by Shannon's desire for new challenges and opportunities in the automotive industry, rather than by any personal conflict with the cast or crew. The mutual decision framing is the entertainment industry's standard diplomatic language for a separation that both parties have agreed to characterize in the most anodyne terms available, and it leaves the actual dynamics of the departure entirely obscured. What the available record shows is that Shannon's appearances on screen became increasingly sporadic before the final departure, the kind of gradual fade that is either a deliberate production decision to reduce a character's role or the natural result of someone who is already psychologically moving toward the exit, while the camera is still technically aimed at them. The fan response was concerned rather than outraged, which reflects the specific quality of the connection viewers had formed with Shannon. Genuine affection for someone who seemed genuinely good at something, genuinely difficult, combined with the sense that the television environment was never quite the right container for the kind of patient, meticulous work that motorcycle fabrication at that level actually required. Since leaving Counting Cars, Shannon Aikau has remained active in the custom motorcycle world through appearances at charity events and car shows, maintaining the professional reputation built over years of serious fabrication work without the television platform that originally brought it to a wider audience. The work continues, the reputation is intact, and the departure from the show looks in retrospect less like a professional setback and more like a craftsman returning to the environment where the work could be done properly, without the scheduling pressure and episodic format constraints that television inevitably imposes on processes that do not respect either. If Shannon Aikau's departure was the quietest and most professionally dignified exit on this list, the person occupying the top position represents the opposite end of the spectrum in almost every dimension. Number 1. The management culture that was the real problem all along. The most honest answer to the question of who the worst employee at Count's Kustoms was across the entire run of Counting Cars is the one that the show's format was never designed to deliver. It is not a single person, but a pattern. A management culture that produced a bookkeeper who left under circumstances nobody would clearly explain. A financial employee who stole $75,000 before anyone caught it. A beloved detailer whose departure generated questions that were never answered. And a master craftsman who faded away because the environment apparently no longer suited the kind of work he wanted to do. Danny Koker has been consistently, almost heroically, defended by the people in the automotive and television communities who know the operation best. Ryan Evans, the shop's head painter who has been with Koker for 25 years, was the subject of embezzlement rumors that Danny addressed directly and dismissed with obvious genuine emotion, calling Evans' family and describing the rumors as horrible in a way that landed with complete credibility. Kevin Mack, who replaced Scott Jones as shop manager and remained in that role through the show's entire subsequent run, has by every available account represented the stable and loyal core of an operation that needed exactly that after the turbulence of the earlier cast transitions. Danny Koker himself, when confronted with the volume of false and fabricated stories circulating online about Count's Kustoms, expressed genuine bewilderment about the gap between the operation visitors actually encounter when they walk through the shop's doors and the narrative being constructed about it in content designed to generate clicks rather than accuracy. The man who built all of it is still there, working in his 60s with no visible intention of stopping. But the cumulative picture painted by 9 seasons of cast departures, 2 significant lawsuits, 1 documented embezzlement, and the series of unexplained exits that left audiences repeatedly asking why their favorite cast members were gone without explanation, is a picture of a workplace that operated at a higher temperature than most, with a management style that valued loyalty and passion above almost everything else and paid the price when that loyalty was misplaced. The show captured the best version of what Count's Kustoms was: the incredible builds, the family atmosphere, the genuine love for machines that Danny Koker has never had to perform, because it was always simply who he was. What it could not capture, because no television show can fully capture the texture of a real working environment, was the cost of running that kind of operation across a decade, with cameras running, deadlines pressing, and people cycling in and out in ways that every leadership failure and every personnel mistake became part of the permanent record. The 5 worst employees in Counting Cars history were not 5 individuals who failed Danny Koker. They were 5 chapters in the story of what happens when a genuine passion project scales up into a television institution, and the human machinery required to sustain that scaling turns out to be considerably more complicated than any camera could fully show. So, which of these 5 departures surprised you the most? And do you think the management culture at Count's Kustoms was the real story that Counting Cars never fully told? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.